Here is a match the following type of question. Which of the following options indicates correctly matched pairs for column 1 and column 2? Under column 1, as you can see, there are different hormones listed. There's prolactin, luteinizing hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, and oxytocin. And under column 2, the functions of these various hormones are given. Okay, so first we have stimulates a vigorous contraction of the uterus during childbirth, secretion of glucocorticoids, formation of milk in mammary glands, and secretion of male sex hormone. Now, before we look at the options, let us try to understand the functions of all the hormones that are listed under column 1. So there was prolactin, luteinizing hormone, which is abbreviated as LH, ACTH, which stands for adrenocorticotropic hormone, and oxytocin. So these are the 4 hormones that were mentioned under column 1. Among these hormones, prolactin, luteinizing hormone, and ACTH, these are synthesized by the anterior lobe of the pituitary. Whereas oxytocin is synthesized by the hypothalamus, it is transported axonally to the posterior pituitary, and the posterior pituitary will store it and secrete it. Okay, so oxytocin is secreted by the posterior pituitary gland. Now let's talk about their functions, starting with prolactin. I'm sure you know that the term lacto relates to milk, right? So prolactin is a hormone that is involved in regulating the growth of mammary glands, and also it stimulates the formation of milk in them. So during pregnancy, during mid-pregnancy, the milk formation in the mammary glands will begin in mammals. So that is stimulated by this hormone known as prolactin, which is synthesized by the anterior pituitary. Also what it does is it will stimulate the growth of the mammary glands during pregnancy and also post childbirth for as long as the mother nurses the child. Okay, talking about luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone is abbreviated as LH. Now, I already told you this also is a hormone that is synthesized and secreted by the anterior lobe of the pituitary. Okay, so this is a type of gonadotropin. Now, what do we understand by gonadotropin? Gonadotropins are hormones that are synthesized by the anterior pituitary, which will act on the gonads. So, the gonads are our testes and ovaries. So, luteinizing hormone in males acts on testes, and in females it acts on our ovaries. Okay, so I'll tell you what it does in males. In males, LH is also known as ICSH. Okay, so ICSH stands for interstitial cell stimulating hormone. Okay, so within the testes, you have cells known as interstitial cells that are also called as Leydig cells. So, LH in males will act on these cells and stimulate those cells to produce androgens such as testosterone. Okay, so that is the function of LH in males, and in females, it induces ovulation. Now, what is ovulation? I'm sure you know that once every month, in the menstrual cycle, the eggs get released from the ovary and it gets, released from the follicle. So the egg is basically present inside a follicle. A fully mature follicle is known as the Graafian follicle. The Graafian follicle will rupture to release the egg, and that process is what we call ovulation. Okay, so this LH hormone in females will induce ovulation, and after ovulation, there will be some part of the follicles that remains in the ovary. Okay, so that is known as corpus luteum, and it will secrete a hormone known as progesterone. So after ovulation, LH will, it will maintain the corpus luteum. So it will ensure that after ovulation, corpus luteum is maintained. So that is the function of LH in females. So it's called luteinizing hormone. It maintains corpus luteum. That is one way to remember its function in females. Okay. So ACTH. ACTH stands for adrenocorticotropic hormone. So this hormone is produced and secreted by the anterior pituitary. So as the name suggests, adrenocorticotropic hormone is the hormone that will stimulate the adrenal cortex to synthesize steroid hormones such as glucocorticoids from the adrenal cortex. Now, ACTH will act on the adrenal gland. Adrenal glands are a pair of glands that are located on top of our kidneys. So in the adrenal gland, you have the outer region, which we call the cortex, and the inner region, which we call the medulla. The adrenal cortex will produce hormones like glucocorticoids. One example is cortisol. So when ACTH is produced by the anterior pituitary, it will stimulate the adrenal cortex to produce and release glucocorticoids from the adrenal cortex. Okay. So oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hormone that is produced by the hypothalamus, released by the posterior pituitary. It will stimulate contraction of the smooth muscles in the wall of the uterus during childbirth. Okay. So whenever there is labor pain, that is because of the uterine walls vigorously contracting and relaxing. Because of these contractions, the child or the fetus that the mother is carrying will be expelled outside, and that is how parturition or delivery will take place. So the function of oxytocin here is to stimulate a vigorous contraction of the uterus at the time of childbirth. Okay, so now that we know the functions of all the hormones listed under column 1, let us try to match them with the correct functions under column 2. Okay, so prolactin will it will stimulate the formation of milk in the mammary glands. So A can be matched with 3. B, LH or luteinizing hormone. It will stimulate the Leydig cells or the interstitial cells in the testes in males and stimulate them to secrete the male sex hormones, that is the androgens such as testosterone. So B can be matched with 4. C stands for, ACTH stands for adrenocorticotropic hormone. So this one will stimulate the adrenal cortex to secrete glucocorticoids like cortisol. So C can be matched with 2. And D, oxytocin. Oxytocin is involved in stimulating the vigorous contraction of the smooth muscles in the wall of the uterus during childbirth. So D can be matched with 1. So the correct answer is A3, B4, C2 and D1, which in the given question is option B. Here is an interesting question. Choose the correct combination of A and B. So A and B are given here. In the options, you can see that A and B are different types of hormones. Okay, so A is a hormone that is secreted by the hypothalamus and it acts on the anterior pituitary. B is a hormone that is produced by the anterior pituitary and it acts like it acts on the adrenal cortex. Okay, so the pituitary gland is known as the master gland for a reason, right? So it is known as the master gland because it secretes several hormones that will act on other endocrine glands and regulate its function. So one such gland that the pituitary hormone will act on is the adrenal cortex. So the pituitary gland will produce 4 different types of hormones that will act on different endocrine glands. It produces TSH or the thyroid stimulating hormone that will act on the thyroid gland. It will produce gonadotropins like FSH and LH. FSH is follicle stimulating hormone. LH is luteinizing hormone. Both these are gonadotropins, which means it will act on our gonads like the testes and the ovaries. And the 4th type of hormone that is produced by the anterior pituitary is ACTH. ACTH stands for adrenocorticotropic hormone. Now, adrenocorticotropic hormone that is produced by the anterior pituitary will specifically act on the adrenal cortex. Now, what do you think is the adrenal cortex? Adrenal glands are a pair of glands that are located on top of our kidneys. Okay, so each adrenal gland, the outer region is known as the cortex and the inner region is known as the medulla. So the adrenal cortex is involved in the secretion of several steroid hormones. So what ACTH that is produced by the anterior pituitary does is it will act on the adrenal cortex and it will stimulate the adrenal cortex to secrete glucocorticoids. Okay, so the glucocorticoids, one example for that is cortisol. So we know that option B here represents ACTH. Now we have to find out what A is. If pituitary is known as the master gland, then the hypothalamus is called the master of master gland because the hypothalamus regulates the functioning of the anterior pituitary. The hypothalamus produces 2 different types of hormones. Okay, so one type is known as releasing hormones and the other type is known as inhibiting hormones. Both the releasing as well as inhibiting hormones, they will act on the anterior pituitary itself. So the target is the same, but the difference is that the releasing hormones will act on the anterior pituitary and it will stimulate the anterior pituitary to produce and secrete its hormones, whereas the inhibiting hormones, as the name suggests, will do the exact opposite. So it will act on the anterior pituitary itself, but it will inhibit the anterior pituitary from producing and secreting its hormones. As you can see, B here is ACTH. So hormone A that is produced by the hypothalamus is stimulating the anterior pituitary to produce ACTH. So this hormone must be a releasing hormone, right? So this has to be a releasing hormone. Since it is stimulating the release of adrenocorticotropic hormone, hormone A must be CRH. Okay, CRH stands for corticotropin releasing hormone. So hypothalamus will produce CRH, which is corticotropin releasing hormone. This will stimulate the anterior pituitary. Anterior pituitary in response will synthesize and secrete adrenocorticotropic hormone. This hormone will act on the adrenal cortex and in turn stimulate the adrenal cortex to produce and release glucocorticoids like cortisol. Okay, I hope you've understood. I will summarize it quickly. The hypothalamic hormone called the corticotropin releasing hormone, in short it is called the CRH. It acts on the pituitary gland, specifically the anterior pituitary gland, and stimulates the synthesis as well as the release of ACTH, which is short for adrenocorticotropic hormone. ACTH in turn will stimulate the adrenal cortex to release glucocorticoid hormones such as cortisol. So cortisol is the primary stress hormone and it will help the body respond to stress. Alright, so A must be CRH and B must be ACTH. Now the other options we had in the question include growth hormone, TSH and TRH. Growth hormone is a hormone that is produced by the anterior lobe of the pituitary and it is responsible for growth of the body, as the name suggests. TSH, I already mentioned about this. TSH is a hormone that is produced by the anterior pituitary. It stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. It acts on the thyroid gland and stimulates it to release thyroid hormones. Talking about TRH. TRH is a short form for thyrotropin releasing hormone. This is a type of releasing hormone that is secreted by the hypothalamus. It acts on the anterior pituitary and stimulates it to release TSH. Okay. So to this question, the correct answer is option D. A is corticotropin releasing hormone and B is adrenocorticotropic hormone. So A is CRH and B is ACTH. Now let's take a look at the question. Low levels of TSH can be found in, the options are cretinism, hypothyroidism, hyperthyroidism and jet lag. So here we are talking about when exactly TSH levels are low. Okay, so TSH here stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. Now this is a hormone that is produced by the anterior pituitary gland. Okay, so this hormone acts on the thyroid gland and will stimulate the thyroid gland to produce thyroid hormones like T3 and T4. T3 is also known as triiodothyronin and T4 is also known as thyroxine or tetraiodothyronin. So what is happening here? There is a TSH hormone that is produced by the anterior pituitary. It will act on the thyroid gland. In response, the thyroid gland will produce the thyroid hormones. Now, does the stimulus from or the stimulation from TSH always required for the thyroid gland? Not necessary, right? Whenever there is sufficient concentration or sufficient levels of T3 and T4 in blood, then there is no need for stimulating the thyroid gland to produce more hormones. For example, let's say there is an excess or increased levels of T3 and T4 found in blood. Then what will happen? If TSH is secreted, it will stimulate the thyroid gland to produce even more, but there's already excess. So what our body does in order to adjust the levels of T3 and T4 in blood is whenever there is excess or more concentration of T3 and T4 found in blood, it will inhibit the pituitary gland from producing TSH. So when there's no TSH, there is no stimulating thyroid gland to produce T3 and T4. This happens when there's already enough or when there is more than sufficient T3 and T4 circulating in the blood. Okay. So here we were asked when are the levels of TSH low in blood. So it happens when there is excess levels of T3 and T4 circulating in blood. So the condition where the T3 and T4 hormone levels get too high, that is known as hyperthyroidism. Okay, so whenever the T3 and T4 levels get too high, they exert a negative feedback on the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. As a result, less TSH will be secreted. I already told you this, right? So in hyperthyroidism, hyper here refers to excess. In hyperthyroidism, T3 and T4 levels are abnormally high, so they inhibit the secretion of TSH and bring down its levels. Okay? So in the options, there was a mention of cretinism, hypothyroidism, and jet lag as well. So let me tell you about cretinism. Cretinism is a consequence of hypothyroidism in a pregnant female. So whenever a female is pregnant and she is suffering from hypothyroidism, hypo means less, okay? So in her body, there is less thyroid hormones than normal. In that case, the fetus that she is carrying, the child that she is carrying will be affected. Okay, so the child will not develop very well mentally as well as physically, and it will result in stunted growth. Now that is known as cretinism, and cretinism is a consequence of hypothyroidism in pregnant female where the fetus that she is carrying will be affected. Okay, so hypothyroidism, in both hypothyroidism and cretinism, there is an abnormally low secretion of the thyroid hormones. So in order to bring the thyroid hormone levels back to normal, the TSH production will be high in this case and not low. So when TSH is produced in greater quantities, it will stimulate the thyroid gland to produce more thyroid hormones so that the T3 and T4 levels can be brought back to normal in case of hypothyroidism. So that is why cretinism and hypothyroidism are incorrect. Now what is jet lag? Jet lag is a condition that results when you're traveling between two different time zones. For example, you're traveling to the US from India or the other way around. So there is a difference in time zones, right? So our body's internal clock, our biological clock will take time to adjust to the new surroundings, okay? So to the new time zone. That is jet lag. Jet lag is a condition that results from the travel between different time zones when the body clock takes time to adjust to the new time zone. So that is jet lag. Here we were asked, when can we find low levels of TSH? I'm sure you've understood now. You can find it during hyperthyroidism. So the correct answer to this question is option B. Now this is a very interesting question. The secretion of which of these hormones is raised during stressful situations? The options are ACTH, which stands for adrenocorticotropic hormone. Option B, melatonin. Option C, MSH, which stands for melanocyte stimulating hormone. And option D, TSH, which stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. So we have to find out which among the given hormones are secreted in high amounts during stressful situations. Okay, so whenever there is any stress, so our body, you could be feeling fear or you could be feeling anxiety. During the time of stress, what happens is the hypothalamus will produce a hormone known as CRH. Now this CRH stands for corticotropin releasing hormone. Okay, so whenever there is stress, the hypothalamus will first produce and secrete a hormone known as CRH, which stands for corticotropin releasing hormone. This is a type of releasing hormone that will act on the anterior pituitary. In response to this hormone, the anterior pituitary will produce another hormone which is known as ACTH. ACTH stands for adrenocorticotropic hormone. As the name suggests, this hormone will act on the adrenal cortex. Adrenal glands are a pair of glands that are located above our kidneys. It has the outer region which is known as the cortex, and it has the inner region which is known as the medulla. Both the adrenal cortex and the adrenal medulla are involved in the secretion of various hormones. So in this case, during stress, ACTH produced by the pituitary gland will act on the adrenal cortex and stimulate the adrenal cortex to produce glucocorticoids such as cortisol. Okay, so cortisol is our body's primary stress hormone. So whenever there is any stress, cortisol is produced by this mechanism, and the cortisol will deal with the stressful situation. Okay, so I'll repeat. During stressful situations, more CRH is produced by the hypothalamus. CRH is corticotropin releasing hormone. This CRH will stimulate the release of adrenocorticotropic hormone by the anterior pituitary, which will further stimulate the adrenal cortex to release glucocorticoids such as cortisol, which is also known as the stress hormone. So during a stressful situation, the levels of CRH, ACTH and cortisol, all of this will be high. But among the options, we had only ACTH. So the correct answer to this question is ACTH. Melatonin also was one of the options. Melatonin is a hormone that is produced by the pineal gland, which is located on the dorsal side of our forebrain. Okay, so it is involved in the regulation of diurnal cycle, which includes the sleep-wake cycle in our body. And MSH, which was one of the options. MSH stands for melanocyte stimulating hormone. This is a hormone that is produced by the pars intermedia region of the pituitary gland. As the name suggests, melanocyte stimulating hormone will act on the melanocytes that are present in our skin, and therefore it will regulate or influence the skin coloration or pigmentation. Talking about TSH, which was one of the options. TSH stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. As the name suggests, it will act on the thyroid gland and stimulate the thyroid gland to secrete its hormones like T3 and T4, and this is produced by the anterior pituitary gland. Okay, so the secretion of which of the hormones is raised during stressful situations? Among the given options, it is option A, ACTH, but during stressful situations, corticotropin releasing hormone by the hypothalamus as well as cortisol, which is produced by the adrenal cortex, the levels of these hormones also will be high. Now this is a very interesting question. Identify the hormone with its correct matching of source and function. So in the options, there's the name of a hormone given, its source given and its function given, and we have to find out the hormone which is correctly matched with its source as well as its function. Now let's look at the options. Option A, oxytocin. Source is posterior pituitary and function is growth and maintenance of mammary glands. Option B, melatonin. Source is pineal gland. Function is regulates the normal rhythm of the sleep-wake cycle. Option C, FSH, which stands for follicle stimulating hormone. Source given here is hypothalamus and the function is stimulates growth and development of ovarian follicles in females. And option D, ACTH, which stands for adrenocorticotropic hormone, and the source that is given here is thyroid and function is regulation of basal metabolic rate. Okay, so these are the different options given and we have to find out which one is correctly matched. Okay, let's examine each option starting with the first one. Oxytocin, posterior pituitary. Now, one thing you must remember about oxytocin is that it's not produced and released by the same gland. It's produced by the hypothalamus and secreted by the posterior pituitary. Okay, so now let's look at its function. Growth and maintenance of mammary glands. So this is incorrect. Growth and maintenance of mammary glands is a function of prolactin hormone secreted by the anterior pituitary. Oxytocin's function is to stimulate contraction of the uterine muscles during childbirth. So that makes this option incorrect. Option B, melatonin secreted by the pineal gland. So melatonin is produced by the pineal gland. It is involved in the regulation of the normal rhythm or the sleep-wake cycle. So this is the correct. Both the source and the function is correct for melatonin. Now let's look at why C and D are wrong. FSH. FSH stands for follicle stimulating hormone. As the name suggests, this hormone is responsible for stimulating the development of follicles in the ovaries in females. Okay, so this hormone is not produced by the hypothalamus. It is produced by the anterior pituitary. Okay, so that makes this statement, this option incorrect. But the function is the correct function is given. It stimulates the growth and development of the ovarian follicles in females. Function is correct, but the source is incorrect. Talking about option D, ACTH. ACTH stands for adrenocorticotropic hormone. Now, it is not produced by the thyroid gland. The source is incorrect. ACTH is produced by the anterior pituitary. The function also is incorrect. The function of ACTH is to act on the adrenal cortex and stimulate the production of glucocorticoids from the adrenal cortex. So the correct answer to this question is option B. Let me summarize it very quickly. The pineal gland is an endocrine gland that is located at the dorsal side of the forebrain. It secretes a hormone that is known as melatonin. Melatonin is involved in regulating the 24-hour or the diurnal rhythm of our body. It also maintains the regular rhythm in the sleep-wake cycle. So that was the correct answer. Now let's address the distractors. Oxytocin is synthesized by the hypothalamus, like I told you, and it's released by the posterior pituitary. It acts on the smooth muscles of the uterus and stimulates their contraction during childbirth or parturition. Now, FSH is also known as follicle stimulating hormone. It is secreted by the anterior pituitary and it stimulates the growth and development of ovarian follicles in females. In males, it regulates spermatogenesis, which is the process by which sperms are formed. ACTH, which is known as adrenocorticotropic hormone, it is produced by the anterior pituitary. It stimulates the adrenal cortex to synthesize and secrete glucocorticoids. So to this question, the correct hormone with the correct source and function is option B. So the correct answer to this question is option B.